good evening, friends. It is I, Nick Pennsylvania, and I am here this evening with my good friend, as always, Brendan Bond. Brendan, how are you?
I'm doing excellent, Nick. How are you, bud?
I'm really good, really excited for this evening because Brendan has brought a couple stories today, and I think the last couple times we've been having conversations together, I've been kind of throwing a couple short bits of UFO things out there because I found this radio program really smitten with for strange reasons. But you have a brief UFO thing, and then you have another larger thing you want to bring to the table this evening, shine some light about, have a conversation about. I'm especially excited for that, but I don't know. How about you we'll just jump right in. What's this UFO thing about?
So the UFO thing is it's kind of UFO adjacent, but tonight was the first time, because I spent like a lot of us spent a lot of time outside, a lot of time looking up at the night sky, and I finally, for the first time this evening, saw the Starlink satellites going overhead.
Oh, is that the Elon Musk thing?
Yeah, it's the SpaceX satellites that have to do with like global internet access and whatnot. It was really cool. Like, it really was cool to see. It was very kind of like sci-fi, because like I always heard that, like, oh yeah, you can see them with naked eye. They look like they look like those little dots of satellites that you see moving across the night sky, but they're all in a row.
Yeah,
like equidistant and everything. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool. For as often as I've looked for them, this was the first night that I saw them, and boy, was it freaky looking, because they're like, again, they're completely equidistant, and they are, they're like bright. They look brighter and they look lower. They're probably not, but that's how at least they appear. So I don't know if they actually have lights on them, maybe, or whatnot. I'm honestly not sure. But when I saw it, I immediately was like, oh, I completely understand why someone who wouldn't be familiar with this would think this was like a UFO or something unusual or paranormal.
Right. Something flying in formation, effectively.
Right. Because it looked like, because of the clouds, it looked like there was maybe 24 of them. So it's not like it's just like 3 in a row. It's like a lot. It like keeps going. So I could see someone seeing that and be like, oh, that's like the edge of one craft or something. And, it's a little kind of freaky looking, but honestly, like as a sci-fi fan, it was kind of cool to see.
I wonder if it's comparable to the people that saw Sputnik tinkle by.
Right. Where it's because, again, we're used to seeing individual satellites moving nowadays, but I'm sure for a long period of our history, when satellites were first starting to become prevalent,
right,
it probably really freaked people out, I bet. Even if
I don't know if freaked out. I mean, I guess it depends on how aware you were of international politics at the time. Right. But I imagine that even today, most people aren't looking up at the sky and recognizing satellites versus stars.
Right. And I have an uncle who is very much into amateur astronomy and stuff. We were just talking about Cherry Springs recently. I remember when they first were launching those, he was saying that a lot of folks especially the amateur astronomy community, kind of fascinated by it, but also very wary of it because of the prevalence of it. Yeah, because of the prevalence of just like filling up the night sky with artificial things.
Well, beyond that, it's I don't know if you're familiar. I'm trying to think of the theory that was postulated about there will be so much debris in space, it'll essentially cut off our access to further space exploration. And the other thing
because of all the junk,
which did slow down for a while, but now with these satellites, and there's going to there's another competing one as well.
I believe so, yeah.
Part of the issue is that, from my understanding, is that this space junk could be hitting these things because they're whipping by at the speed of a bullet. Who knows what damages could happen then?
Right.
But it's also, I kind of do worry about any particular person monopolizing something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm weary myself.
Right. I can completely understand that, like that trepidation. But for how much I've been hearing about the last few years, it was kind of cool to see it in person for the first time.
There's no denying that. There's no denying that. It's super interesting. I when you were speaking about looking up and seeing satellites, when accustomed to seeing satellites, I remember the old Billy Bragg lyric. You remember the
I'm trying.
I saw two shooting stars last night, and I wished
Yeah,
on them, but
no,
they
but
were only satellites.
it's such a
Is it wrong to wish on space hardware?
space hardware. Yeah. Oh my god, dude. A New England is such a good song. Such a good tune. Yeah, no,
I am
that's a
more
good
familiar with
correlation.
our friends and Tommy Gutless covering it, to be
Their version,
honest.
their version was pretty darn good. Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
is it wrong to wish on space hardware?
Such a good line. But yeah, so that was just my quick little UFO adjacent thing that I wanted to bring up tonight. So if anyone else out there has seen the Starling satellites and agrees or disagrees, let us know. Love to hear about
Well, let's get on to the main course here. Now, I do want to say, and I've already quizzed you on this, but
it.
at least as far as people that check us out by way of YouTube, one of the most popular, by a good margin, episodes we've ever done was on the Peninsula Python, which is a story about, well, a python in Ohio, but it's a little more involved than that because even though there's lots of very clear evidence that a real python was roaming about the now gone neighborhood of Peninsula, Ohio, it morphed over the years into a folktale of sorts where people are looking for a python, a snake of abnormally large size. So, one of our more popular episodes, thank you to all those of you who have tuned into that. So, we're going to go back to Ohio, that state immediately to our west. And you've got another story, not just from Ohio, but of an animal somewhat folky of unusual size. You're wanting to talk today about the Loveland frog, of which I've heard the title, but I haven't heard the tale.
Oh, there we go. Then this will be fun. Then the Loveland frog or Loveland Frogman is one of those kind of like whenever you see a list of like fun cryptids or even obscure cryptids, it tends to make a lot of those lists because it's on the surface, like a lot of these stories seems like, just a normal kind of urban legend. But like we talk about a lot of times, once you start digging into these different stories, there's a lot of interesting things that kind of come up. And the Loveland Frogman is no different. So Loveland, Ohio, like you mentioned, it's a small town. It is known as the sweetheart of Ohio. And it's right on the Little Miami River. And over the years, the town has, like a lot of these places, kind of embraced the story, kind of like the Flatwoods Monster and Mothman,
name any
Point
lake
Pleasant,
monster.
any lake monster, Raystown, any of those places.
Mothman.
Right, yeah, to the point where it is actually the mascot of the town. If you Google Loveland Frogman, you'll see like the mascot costumes and everything, and it appears that he spends most of his time promoting the parks and outdoor recreation in Loveland, Ohio, which, you know what, I can really support. I think that's a great thing for a cryptid to help out with.
It sounds entirely appropriate, right? It's, as the kids say, on brand.
Yes. So, but to kind of get into this story, there are lots of variations on this tale. If you do your own research, which I encourage, you'll find lots of the typical urban legend kind of like morphing and mixing throughout the years. But there's kind of what I found three main kind of points over the years that I think are worth kind of talking about. So this story starts with a businessman in 1955. And I'm going to read here some sections from a book that I will put into the show notes. This is Eerie Appalachia by Mark Muncy and Kari Schultz. A really fun little book. And I have the Loveland Frogmen appears in a few books we have. This is, I think, the most concise and straightforward telling of some of the tales. So this story starts with a businessman. So in May of 1955, just after 3 o'clock in the morning, an unnamed businessman was traveling alongside Riverside Drive along the Little Miami River. His headlights illuminated three strange figures standing alongside the road. The abnormal creatures were about 3 feet in height and had leathery skin. They were reptilian and left the road to go under a nearby bridge. The businessman watched them in awed silence for some time. They seemed to be speaking to one another in some sort of conversation. He noted that one of the figures was definitely some sort of leader. He got out of his car and tried to get a closer look and hear what they were talking about. When he was a short distance from them, he stumbled and, while making too much noise, alerted them. Most of the group ran off and jumped into the river. The leader suddenly raised what the witness described as a metallic wand. The cylindrical device suddenly sparked with power. The witness bounded back into his car and took off as fast as he could. So that is like the original, like from what I can find, the 1955 businessman account is like the first time these frogmen were in fact seen. Nick, I'm going to share my screen real quick. I know you guys can't see this, but if you Google this stuff, in the original description that they talk about these leathery frogmen, and we were able to find an original sketch that whenever this businessman made the report, the original sketch is kind of creepy. I suggest you guys look it up. It was drawn by someone named Len Stringfield.
Yeah, Nick, it's very amateurish.
It's very amateurish, and it is really creepy. Again, I encourage everyone to Google these photos because most of the other images of the Loveland Frogman are kind of what you expect. It looks like a, cartoonish kind of frog.
It really looks like the frog and toad. The image that you showed me before, where there's a car in the background, the frog's running. Yeah, it looks like an old wood block print. Mm-hmm. However, it also looks like whoever there's this black and white one looks like a wood block print. It looks like whoever did this had some carnal intentions for this frogman, because it is.
There are too many images of the Loveland Frogman with like a very defined butt.
And the story, the encounter, this original encounter that
has nothing to do with that.
They did not like go on for at length about. I believe my daughter said something to that. It looks caked out.
Caked out, yeah. That's what the kids say. Yep, it's yeah. So I encourage you guys to look up the photo or the different sketches out there, because they're at least they're fun. I'm not sure how accurate they are.
I'm still just gonna have to linger for another minute. Again, the tale you read said nothing of like, and there was this leader frogman, and it had this butt that just
had a great butt. Yeah,
it was amazing. I couldn't do it. And it pulled out something cylindrical. And it was waving around for probably a few minutes. So I didn't notice because, it caught me staring. But I have to say, when you were reading that, in all seriousness, because it's something aquatic, the metallic thing, I thought you were going to say trident.
Well, right. Because that would like fit the lore more. It's like, oh, it's an aquatic, god or something like that.
Yeah, it's a submariner. He's got a trident.
Well, and that's before we get to these other like installations in these stories here. The wand is an interesting thing because you see that popping up the really strange side of like cryptid reports and folklore when it comes to different UFO encounters. You have the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins. There's the Lemuria stuff. There's lots of other things that have these like wands showing up. It's kind of creepy. I believe they even talked about that in the second season of Hellier, which we reference pretty often. But that implies that they are, again, like sentient beings with technology, not just big frogs.
Right. Not only are they some sort of hybrid being, but they've advanced to a tool age.
Right. And in a few of the reports, especially of this original encounter, it talks about showering with sparks and everything, and it's obviously some sort of technology, which is like a weird wrinkle because you think it's just going to be, oh, this is just like a cryptid story, but it's a little weirder than that. Like that wand takes it to like that next level of strange, I think.
Now that one drawing that I said, it looks very amateur, and I'm not meaning that
in a bad way,
as a criticism. It doesn't have the detail of the wood block looking sort of print, which is done extremely well.
Right.
The faces look very human to me.
They do.
And every other image that you showed, it looks just like a frog-ish body, human legs.
I can't remember what they're called in Dungeons and Dragons and in Pathfinder. I'm sure a few other fantasy games. There are like frog classes that are basically like these things. Not classes,
I'm not
races.
Going to be able to answer.
Yeah, but I'm gonna have to. Tom, our buddy Tom plays one right now. But yeah, so like it fits in that like category. But then you see this wand, and it's like, oh, that's even weirder.
But what I'm getting at is that the amateurs with the very human-like features, was that the first drawing?
That one was labeled 1955. Now, whether or not, and again, it's one of those things where again it pops up a few different places, and the provenance is like, like it's hard to like. Some places,
okay, but the bottom line is it's one of the earlier ones. So
yes,
we can assume that it was based on a first-hand or a second-hand account of hearing it. Right. So it makes me wonder, like, what could this? What's the mistaken identification?
Well,
because when you look at that picture again, very human-looking. What's going on?
Right. You're getting right to, I think, what everyone asks whenever you have out-of-place animals or weird animals that are kind of human-like. Or any cryptid sighting, even with Bigfoot, like the first thing people think is, okay, well, was it a bear? That's always the first,
right.
And that's natural. And from what I can tell, this original story, kind of sparks the folklore and everything. And you have different variations popping up over the next few decades. Now, when it comes to that possible mistaken identity, we get a little bit of a look into that in the 1972 incidents with two police officers from the town named Ray Shockey and Mark Matthews. These ones, there's a lot more like firsthand news articles out there on them. So I'm going to read kind of the overview of what happened with their encounters. At 1 a.m., and this is in, again, 1972, on Riverside Drive in Loveland, a Loveland police officer, Ray Shockey, had just turned past the Totes Boot Factory. He was driving alongside the Little Miami River, again, same river, when he was startled by an unidentified animal that ran past the front of his car. After he swung his spotlight onto the animal to identify it, he was stunned. He described the creature as being around 4 feet tall and about 50 to 75 pounds. It had leathery skin, large eyes. It looked so strange that it looked so strange, it was crouched like a giant frog. It then stood erect, stepped over the nearby guardrail, quickly moved down the embankment, and drove itself into the river. This police officer, Shockey, did not want to file a report initially, but once he discussed it with his fellow officers, they told him of the original urban legend. He then decided that he had to write the report. It made a small splash in the local newspapers at the time. Shockey noted that he was approached by numerous media outlets to describe the incident. 2 weeks into the media frenzy in the town, a second police officer named Mark Matthews saw an animal in the same area. He shot the reptilian beast and put it in the trunk of his car to show Shockey. It was a large iguana with no tail. Matthews assumed it was an escaped pet. Shockey confirmed that it was the same beast that he had seen and could not identify it as an iguana due to the missing tail.
Okay, well then, that's an interesting story. I mean, it has a clear-cut conclusion.
It does.
And but this is very much like the Peninsula Python, in which we were able to find accounts of, there actually being a python that escaped, and maybe it was cited a few times, and maybe it was somehow able to overwinter, and now we have a tailless iguana out. And so maybe that incident and the story goes from there. Now, that still doesn't jive with the fact that there was already the established lore that was only really, less than 20 years.
Less than 20 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you're right, it does kind of like bookend that. And I think a lot of people probably heard that and went, oh, the original Loveland frog sighting was a iguana.
Real quick, and I'm sorry, I feel like I cut you off there. But
no,
would you bring that wood print one back up? Because hearing that story, I did, because the image you sent me over the phone, I couldn't see that there was a car in there, but now I see. I think this is
the police
car in the back. When the funny
so.
thing about this is, okay, I'm not going to say anything more about the dimensions of this frogman, But you know what it doesn't look like? It
Does not
doesn't
look
look like a tailless iguana.
It does not look like a tailless iguana. Yeah.
Not at all.
Right. It just straight up doesn't.
So here's what bothers me. Here's what bothers me about this. I mean, the police story, great story. I could see it's such a weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's super satisfying that they were able to corroborate, like, okay, I shot this thing, and oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly what it was. Of course I couldn't identify it because it doesn't have a tail, and because you do not expect to see large iguanas roaming around Ohio.
Right.
But where was I going with this? It's it's very satisfying towards that end, and I can see where everything comes from there. I still don't see how it connects to this original thing.
I think it's a false connection. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. But now that there's this picture of it, and it's a phenomenal work of art. And I mean that sincerely.
Someone spent a lot of time on that butt. They really
but they didn't put together like this was when the iguana was shot.
Right.
Not the
original.
This is not a Loveland Frog story. This is just a great one of those weird police stories here.
So that's and again, I think that's how a lot of folks probably see this story. Now, look, doing some digging online, again, like everything else, it gets deeper. Some of the things that don't jive, at least for me, about the iguana thing, is everything that you just kind of mentioned. Like, I don't think it has any real. If it was in fact an iguana that this police officer saw, I don't think it has any It doesn't necessarily then have any connection to the original Loveland Frogmen sightings, because it's certainly. I mean, I'm sure iguanas, because I mean, I think some reptiles like that can probably live 20 years.
Oh, they can live a long time.
Right. So,
but of course they. Wintering over here,
in Ohio. Like, I mean, I don't think they can hibernate in the mud like turtles and stuff do. But I mean, we need to get a herpetologist on here to answer that question. Actually, I have a cousin who's a herpetologist. I might reach out to her and be like, "Hey, could a 50-pound iguana without a tail live in Ohio for 20 years in the wild?"
And then they correct you and say they're a herpetologist. They work at GNC.
Right. But looking through these stories and everything online, there's a lot of people that talk about how the reason that the original police officer, Shockey, changed his story, because after this media frenzy, Men in Black showed up to talk to him, apparently, along with the media. Like, again, which at first glance is like, oh, that probably didn't happen. It's like my first reaction.
Agreed.
But I think that it's interesting that if you stick with the original Loveland Frogmen story and think that, okay, well, maybe these aren't cryptids, but this is actually an alien thing. Like, this is some sort of, alien race with technology.
Well,
then it kind of fits.
Explains the sparking wand a bit, but I mean,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying
I know you're not, because I could
but
imagine changing the story. I thought you were going to go because he was being ridiculed by people or whatnot.
Well, that's possible too. Because again, I didn't look up this gentleman's history, but if he didn't know of that story and he was a police officer in the town, he must have been like new and not originally from the area. You'd think
possible.
I mean,
but at the same time, I don't know if he was a younger person,
right? That's
maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was like, you remember the last time we spoke about the Roswell incident.
Right.
It was always no.
It was not. It was not common. That's a good point. That's a really good point.
So maybe, he's 25. Okay, well, this initial incident happened when he was like 7 years old, and so maybe it wasn't really well known. But
right.
I don't know. I could see a lot of things with this. I could see it more changing the story. Like, I'm getting tired of made fun of, and some other guy in the force is like, well, who would blame you for not recognizing the iguana, especially if it doesn't have a tail? Kind of looks frogish.
Right. So that's kind of like the middle story that I was able to find. And again, you have lots of other like pseudo urban legends that come up around the Loveland Frogman sightings and everything. But a few places there were another Frogman story. This is from 2018, so relatively relatively recent.
Yeah.
And this is a nearby place is called Chateau La Roche, which is basically this castle that was built for the Boy Scouts by this gentleman in the area.
Nothing says camping and getting those back to nature skills like staying in the castle.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like from what I can understand, it's kind of like a local oddity. The gentleman who built it is a guy named Harry Andrews that was like obsessed with like medieval like chivalry and stuff like that. But so it's a popular place and kind of like a bit of a tourist attraction now. There was a gentleman named Tim McComber who was staying near the castle and was like visiting it and everything. He drove by the place after hours on his way to his hotel. Knowing of the castle's spooky reputation, he and his group were eager to visit it the next day. He was planning on joining the ghost tour offered at the castle the next evening. While nearing the castle, he saw strange lights in the sky. Being near the Cincinnati airport, he originally did not think anything unusual about the lights in the sky until he noticed that they were moving in strange patterns. The lights swirled, and the group thought it might be some sort of drone race. The lights pulsed strangely and then shot up the sky at an impossible speed. The group realized the lights had been over some woods just a short distance from the castle. The group went along the road and saw large, glowing yellow eyes watching them from the woods. Tim says, I panned my light at the eyes. I was stunned when I saw the frog-like face. Was this the Loveland Frogman? I had come to look for ghosts, not an urban legend, and I was totally unprepared. Tim and his friends scrambled for their phones and cameras, but the creature quickly dove into the water. They described it as about 4 feet tall and very much more like a toad than a frog. They have frequently traveled back to the area hoping for another encounter. This one seems to be documented relatively well. We have the person's name and everything.
Yeah.
And this, for me, only leads to the whole alien conclusion even more, you know?
Okay, well, I've got to say this. While you're telling the story, I'm looking at pictures of this castle.
Yeah.
Looks awesome.
It looks really cool.
It's really cool.
I'd go on a ghost hunt there. I bet they got a great little. I bet they have a great little museum. I bet whoever is the historical curators are fantastic.
There's some good-looking swords hanging out on the walls.
Right.
That's not normally my thing, but it seems appropriate.
Right. It's appropriate. You know, you can appreciate good taste. You know, even if it's not yours.
Well, I like
you know
how I feel about stone houses and everything.
Right. Right.
No, that is an interesting one. And when you were talking about the lights in the sky and everything, I was thinking, oh, is this another? How is this connected in any way?
Right. Right.
So, okay, let me ask you this though. We're talking about a place kind of between Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio, closer to Cincinnati.
Right, right.
If it's an alien thing, why are alien type things
coming
here so frequently? Why are they just landing kind of on the outskirts of this castle? It's not super, secretive. It's also like what is there in Western Ohio that you're hunting for, guys?
Right. But what's near Dayton? Patterson Air Force Base.
That's true. But why do they dive into the water and not just run back to their ship?
Right, exactly.
Like if all of a sudden I'm let's just say I'm trying to commit a breaking and entering at some building. So I park my car around the corner. So people see me. I'm walking up. I'm trying to jimmy a lock. They pan their camera on my yellow eyes, and I run into the tall grasses, not back to my car.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's true. I don't think it's a fully satisfying story in that sense. But I think it is an interesting progression of the story kind of getting weirder and weirder, maybe. Which honestly, when it comes to these urban legends, that's like what I want to see. And I know that's like placating what I want out of these things. But I think it's interesting, and I think that like a lot of urban legends, once you kind of dive into this stuff a little bit further, you find that things are in fact usually weirder than not.
Oh, I agree with that. My question though is, you say you like seeing these things evolve.
I do, yeah.
But that would, to me, suggest that either the stories evolve, is because if it's one singular thing, you would assume that the sightings and whatnot would all be very similar, and probably like into a tighter time frame. Like the Peninsula Python, I don't think there's anything abnormal about it because, well, one, we have documentation showing there's that, but there's also the sightings were overwhelmingly clustered around the 3 years.
They were
immediately surrounding that. And then there you get a smattering of other ones, but those ones are clearly just, whole cloth fabrications.
Right. No, you're right. And you absolutely make a good point. And I think that part of me is like, if we were talking about an actual sentient group of frogmen that were living along the Little Miami River, then I think you're right. I think that's what we would expect to see, is very consistent kind of clustered sightings. But I think that if it is in fact something different and weirder, then I think that with each series of sightings, they're not the same, but it's because you're getting different glimpses and different perspectives of a phenomena, and almost like different angles. So they're naturally going to be a little bit different. And
so that makes sense to me. I mean, that is an argument that holds water with me. I didn't think of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I don't know where that's at in vicinity to Loveland, because, again, that's closer to Cincinnati.
Right.
Okay, but so here's another question. Again, nothing I'm asking or thinking about here is explaining what exactly these people in 2018 saw. But
right.
Okay, you got Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I guess what you're getting at is if there's a place where there are UFOs or aliens coming, either being held or being studied, direct communication with military forces or something like global leaders. Why are they over in Loveland?
Right.
It's that's what I'm getting at. Are they on leave? And
right.
So
maybe they're
going to check out the castle.
Maybe there's
it's not that far a drive. We'll just go over there.
But I mean, it's kind of like, maybe it's like when people go to Washington D.C. from like other countries, and someone says like, "Hey, I want a good record shop while I'm over here." You're probably to go over to Georgetown. And
Adams Morgan and whatnot.
Right, exactly. So like maybe it's a pit stop on a little bit of a sightseeing tour. Who knows?
I just think that, I mean, no offense to the region, but if I were an alien and I'm saying, hey, gotta go we gotta communicate with the human leaders again about Plan 9 from outer space.
Right.
I don't think that's where they're gonna go visit. Like when they're on leave, or when they're just sightseeing. Go to the Grand Canyon. Go to the Azores. Go to
maybe they really appreciate modern replicas of medieval architecture, and the Totes. Don't forget the Totes Boot Factory. Good footwear, I think, transcends species. Probably
that really it should be there.
When you're at that level,
something about you'll come from the other side of the galaxy to get these boots, but. I mean, okay. I don't.
No, I think you're right.
Say something like seriously considering it. People from another planet probably would have a whole different aesthetic appreciation.
Right.
Like I sound really silly saying that, but
the whole thing is a little silly, but it's fun. But again, it's fun, And
again, I mean, the police story, very very satisfying. Really like it. The 1955 story, this 2018 story. Taking it at face value, I could imagine 1955 story is some sort of people working outside, and they got some weird thing on, and maybe Patterson Air Force, maybe they're doing some military testing of some camouflage or system, different apparatus or something. Right. It's still a very weird thing.
It's still a very
2018
weird
story. I have no anything for. Again, taking it at face value that what they report is exactly what and how they saw it.
Right. if we're trusting, yeah. If we're trusting the eyewitness, again, at least there was a few people. So I mean, and again, I think that there is a little bit. This is something I kind of found online when looking at, especially the 2018 thing, which like part of me understands, but I think whenever you have a group of people that are going, for instance, ghost hunting, and they do in fact see something paranormal, I think people are quicker to kind of write that off for a lot of the reasons we talk about sometimes, like priming, like you're out there looking for those things. That being
100%.
said, so which I completely understand. But I would say from an anecdotal standpoint, a lot of the people that I know that are legitimately into legend tripping, ghost hunting, going places to see these kind of things, care about those things so much that I don't think they are any more or less prone to making up things. And again, that's anecdotal. I'm not saying, not speaking for everybody, obviously. That's just kind of just a comment I had on some of the criticism of that story, just based on the fact that they were legend tripping and ghost hunting and things like that. But I think it's a weird story.
Oh, there's no getting over that, and I agree with you. Just because somebody's into that sort of stuff doesn't mean they're necessarily going to make up a story for what reason. I mean, anybody, I think, that's serious enough about it, one, a seriously minded person, I would hope, wouldn't go around concocting stories for no purpose.
Right, yeah.
But two, if you read a lot of these stories, you know how people are ridiculed when they come out with these stories, because it is just difficult to believe. Right.
And especially you have to think for like those two police officers in the 1970s story. Like, you know, you're an authority figure in a town. Like, I imagine, you know, you have a tough job already, getting ridiculed on top. Like if he in fact was, you know, that's tough. You know, like no one's going to do that. I don't think people do that for attention necessarily. But
I mean, I know people do it for attention, but they're typically not the most sound people.
Right.
I know we spoke real early on in our conversations about the Golden Eagle, this cursed car.
Right,
and
yeah.
That was getting a lot of popularity on the internet for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I'm not hooting our own horn here, but I think we were the first to be like, no, that
didn't happen.
That's very not real.
Yeah.
And the person that's behind the story, I don't think they're in the best place of mind.
Right.
And that's what I'm going to say about that.
Right. And I think that, you know, these stories, I think it's interesting that we have the folks' names and everything, and it doesn't seem to be anything immediately alarming about the folks, you know, making these reports. But like no immediate, you know, kind of red flags. But yeah, I just think it's an interesting story. Like I said, you can find stuff on the Loveland Frogmen in a few different books out there. I'm sure there's other podcasts about it. But I just think it's an interesting story because it does have that kind of like evolution of weirdness. There's different perspectives maybe. But the story with the police officers and having that nice bookended, like, oh, that's what it was. If that was the case, like, that's so satisfying. You know?
You know, there's been people that have talked and they're like, you know, that was a no-tailless iguana they shot. That was one of the subordinate frog people.
Right.
You know,
that was one of the underlings
one with his wand.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's wild. But if you out there have a opinion on this story, or just enjoy it, or if you've seen the Loveland Frogmen, we want to hear about
the Totes Boots Factory.
Or the Totes, yeah. But if you want, reach out to us. Let us know. We love hearing from everybody. But if you want to reach out, you can do so either on Instagram or Facebook, or you can send us an email at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.